Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Because I think you are. In today's time, They Live has definitely got to be one of the most important movies ever made. Just imagine this. A movie made way back in 1988 manages to tell you that the society will look exactly like that particular movie 4 decades later. Replace every problem of that movie with today's time, and you can practically see the amount of similarities that we have with that movie are astounding. Social media is practically one of the biggest extensions of what the movie They Live tried to tell us about. People being in a state of sleep, completely losing their consciousness, being blindsided by propaganda, the way how social media has opinionated people in unimaginable ways. Well, the examples are countless. They Live is one of those movies from John Carpenter that is not very well noticed initially, but then, like any other John Carpenter movie, manages to become a cult classic film. You wouldn't believe me if I tell you that I saw this movie just 2 years back, and currently this happens to be one of my favorite movies of John Carpenter's entire career. Be real about that. This movie review will try to be very comprehensive and very precise in terms of why I love this movie, and it is a cult classic and why you should watch it too. So without any further delays, I'll tell you why. The first thing I'd like to highlight in my review here would be the impressive production design. Just like any other John Carpenter movie, this film also boasts of a very high quality production design, even for a low budget. John Carpenter, as you know, is a king of low budget movies. Most of his films seem to have a really low budget, and somehow on that low budget they manage to pull off a very convincing film. Something that a lot of people aren't able to do today with even $1 million as their budget. Yes, you heard me right. They Live has a very convincing premise. Not a single movie, or let's say a single moment in any of the films that I've watched ever since I felt that the production design was actually real. There was some amount of fakeness or some amount of superficiality into them, but the concept and the overall execution of They Live looks like any other average guy who's just walking in the world, living in the roads, probably just making a life for himself, striving hard, and one fine day he discovers a very terrible secret that threatens the world. Very relatable. The movie sort of picks up like a conspiracy theory. There are things that are very weird and unexplainable, and suddenly you see that the world is actually being ruled by aliens and there's a massive conspiracy behind them. The production design is pretty much impressive in every single place, and the special effects, of course, 1988, not a lot of CGI is available, but still they managed to pull some of the best special effects I've ever seen in a Carpenter movie. The effects have still managed to hold up so well that I think they cannot make this movie even this good with CGI. Let's be real about that. That wraps up my first point about why I feel They Live has such a good production design and it's a cult classic, because the production design is pretty much like a character in this movie. They managed to convince you so well that Roddy Piper is basically an unknown, unnamed drifter who comes from some part of the world to LA and finds out that the city and the overall world is being run by aliens. There's a massive propaganda around it that is spellbinding beyond terms. This is point number one, and we should jump into point number two right away. Point number two, the cast. They Live boasts of a very impressive cast. The John Carpenter movie regular Keith David managed to make an appearance here as a character called Frank, and of course our lead character, the late Mr. Roddy Piper, he does not have a name in the movie. A very unconventional choice for a movie otherwise. Generally most of the characters in movies that are lead roles, basically, they have a very weird name. Sometimes they have names that are stylish, sometimes there are names completely go above the head, but this time there's no name at all. That makes it very unique to begin with. Add on top of that the other cast members who have been a part of several movies of the 80s and 70s, and some of them have been like staples in John Carpenter movies from the past. That's also a good thing to see, because it makes you familiar, considering how John Carpenter has been very consistent in terms of bringing back a lot of characters and a lot of people from his older movies into his later films in the 80s as well. They Live also boasts of the idea that the one-liners, the witty one-liners by most of the characters, particularly Roddy Piper's bubblegum dialogue, is still an iconic dialogue. And how can I ever forget the ending of that movie? We'll describe that ending in the next couple of points maybe, but definitely we need to give the bubblegum dialogue a special mention. As a result, here's the bubblegum dialogue for you.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
That's how iconic the bubblegum dialogue is. It is one of the most amazing movies of the 80s, and of course the most amazing movement in the 80s, period. So much so that even Transformers Rise of the Beasts managed to give it a credit. Anyway, nonetheless, the cast and the one-liners are absolutely spot on. The first half of the movie works really well into establishing the background of the film and what it is going to be in the next couple of minutes post the reveal that okay, there is some conspiracy going on and there's some weird stuff happening. The police are turning against homeless beggars and demolishing their homes or something like that. A very very weird sort of events happening, and then turns out the conspiracy is far bigger than we ever know. That wraps up point number 2, with the cast and one-liners being spot on, so much so that they make the movie even more memorable each time you watch it. Number 3, the action choreography. Particularly, let's be very real, the only reason I brought up this point is the 6-minute long sequence between Keith David and the late Roddy Piper. That sequence definitely has to be an inspiration for any filmmaking student. I, as a filmmaking enthusiast, have been learning mostly things from Studio Binder or any other online blog for that record, but this particular scene taught me more about action than any of these blogs or any of these videos could ever teach me. The idea that the action in this particular scene is so raw and so visceral that I'm yet to see a movie in the last 35 years that comes this close to ever imitating the action and the rawness of this particular scene. The overall movie is pretty simple, we know the story about it, but the action definitely deserves a lot of mention. It is realistic, very very believable, and there's not a single place in the movie where you feel that the action is a little far-fetched like any other Kurt Russell movie or any Arnold movie or Sylvester movie from that particular point of time. But the action definitely by Roddy Piper and of course the other cast members was spot on. Not a single moment in the movie would you ever believe that it goes off the rails or completely out of script, but it does do the work very very well. That particular action scene at 6 minutes long, as I mentioned, is a must teach for students in film school who are looking forward to build action movies. Guys, that's how you write action, that's how you execute an action sequence. The visceral nature of that scene is still unimitated, or let's say untampered, in the current Hollywood or even Bollywood landscape as well, for that record. I'm yet to see a scene that is so long, so intense and so brutal. And the whole scene is, by the way, an allegory in itself. The reason I say that, because it's the struggle to make your average common person to look beyond his lenses and see that the world is conniving, very very superficial on the outside, but in the inside it's a whole different game altogether. The idea that Roddy Piper in that particular scene already knows what the world is and how the aliens are subconsciously brainwashing people. Keith David represents the millions and billions of people on the planet who fail to see that sort of thing. He is basically that person who does not understand that the aliens are around and they are subconsciously brainwashing everybody around them, pretty much like how social media is doing things these days. Let's be very real, that's what social media is doing for the longest time. This concludes my point about action, and I feel that the action sequences of this movie, particularly that ally fight, is a great sequence. So finally, summarizing my review for They Live, it's a great movie. It's probably one of the best 80s movies ever. Of course, it has a weak third act and some parts post the revelation scenes don't really stick well. They seem a little bit out of context, and sometimes the idea that they portrayed a theme which did not reach a very very good conclusion is a little debatable at best. But nonetheless, the movie's handling of its action, the characters and the overall setting is impressive, and it has a banger soundtrack, a staple from any John Carpenter movie if you might have seen them. Well, this is the entire video, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video, who has watched it till this point. Please keep buying films on physical media. Like I always tell you, that's the best and the most authentic way to protect films for long. You always have access to them and would not lose them out to any studio whatsoever. And this is John Matthew signing off, and see you another time in another video with another analysis for some different movie.